Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to do 10 on a theme, and the theme is revenge. I got this idea from Mel over at Mel's Bookland Adventure. She did this exact same video. I think we have all different books sometime last week, and I really enjoyed it. So the idea is you pick a theme, in this case revenge. I wasn't creative enough to think of one of my own, so I just borrowed Mel's, and you come up with 10 books that are related to that. So here we go. Surprise, surprise, my number one book is a book by Balzac. That's Cousin Bet. This is a classic novel of revenge. Cousin Bet, overlooked, kind of belittled by her wealthy, successful, powerful family in Paris, seeks revenge against the family by plotting against her cousin, who's waiting to get married. That plot kind of backfires, and her Confederates end up paying an awful price, while the family she hoped to destroy survives, though scarred. One of my favorite books by Balzac. Read it, I think 2 years ago now, in December, which is my Balzac reading month. And really enjoyed it, but it's just a great book about revenge, and it is an incredibly complicated, but an incredibly intricate plot about revenge. Book number 2 is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This book is not completely about revenge, but you know, how can you talk about books about revenge without talking about Miss Havisham, who essentially seeks revenge against all men, represented by Pip, by essentially having the young Estella raised to be essentially a man-destroying character, so that she can exact revenge on men for what happened to her, for being jilted at the altar by her fiance. Great, weird, bizarre revenge plot as a part of Great Expectations. Maybe more famous revenge story than Great Expectations is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Captain Ahab essentially swears vengeance against the white whale Moby Dick, who earlier in Captain Ahab's whaling career had cost Captain Ahab a leg. Ahab drives the Pequod and the men of the Pequod, the whaling ship Pequod, hard, and when they find the white whale, he drives them to the point of destruction, and very few of the men on board the Pequod survive, and Ahab himself is destroyed by his own need for revenge. My next book is Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is Morrison's most famous book, famously made into a movie by Oprah Winfrey. And this book is a really powerful, emotionally devastating story about an African-American woman escaping slavery, and the sacrifice she has to make to do that, and how that sacrifice haunts her for the rest of her life, and her relationships and her kids, and how that the consequences of that lead to essentially revenge being taken on her and everyone associated with her. It's an incredibly great book, and this will be a part of our Toni Morrison 2020 read-along at some point. Also, I wanted to mention William Faulkner. I think I have a lot of writers here represented that I talk about often. Alan from Big Hard Books and Classic and I did a whole series about the Unvanquished, this novel by Faulkner. It's really 4 or 5 related short stories, which all involve the same characters and kind of take place in a somewhat linear fashion. And really, in this book, Faulkner explores the impact that revenge has on people, and in particular the impact that the desire for revenge has on Southerners during and after the Civil War. And in the end, it comes out, I think, Faulkner essentially saying that this desire for revenge just leads to more destruction and more problems, and he is, I think, on the whole against it. And I did a whole kind of video about Faulkner and violence, and the role that violence plays in the South. Another one of my favorite writers right now is Louise Erdrich, and this is one of the few books of hers I've actually read. It's called La Rose, and this book is kind of an interesting take on revenge, where the death of a child divides a family, and nothing they do seems to be able to heal that division until one member of the family comes up with a fairly unique and incredibly emotionally damaging solution that still doesn't really seem to solve the problem or heal the bitterness between those two parts of the family. until an act of revenge deferred, an act of revenge actually not taken, and a celebration of a young boy's birthday bring the family and community together and offer some kind of way forward. So this is a book at which, you feel like revenge is at the heart of the book at all times, and yet it's the revenge that's not done, the revenge not taken, which ends up being the most important part. I don't think I've ever talked about Graham Greene on my channel, probably because this is the only Graham Greene novel I've ever read. The Quiet American. This is literally, I don't travel very much. This is literally a book I picked up because I was in an airport without a book. And this was the book I found in an airport bookstore that I thought, sounded best to me at the time. The Quiet American basically tells the story of a British journalist living in Vietnam during the 1960s. His name is Thomas Fowler, and his relationship with a young American man named Alden Pyle, who ends up being a CIA agent. Alden Pyle not only steals Thomas Fowler's young Vietnamese live-in kind of girlfriend, but he also, through his support for CIA programs and policies, he also supports things that cost the lives of people in Vietnam and are destroying the Vietnam that Thomas Fowler loves, and he finds a way he struggles with the idea of taking revenge, and I won't give away the ending, but revenge is definitely at the heart of that novel as well. I believe I have talked about Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Chronicle of a Death Foretold. This is a short, kind of almost novella-length book by Marquez, which I think gives you a pretty good idea of how his writing style goes and what he can do with the story. This is a story about a marriage ruined essentially before the marriage actually takes place. It is ruined by a seduction. And when the bridegroom finds out on his wedding day that his bride was not a virgin, he violently returns her home. Her brothers swear vengeance on her seducer, and in the process, the whole town waits around to watch the seducer be murdered by the brothers, and none of them does anything about it. Revenge is what this book is about. Revenging and avenging family reputation is at the heart of this book. One of my best books from last year was Ohio by Stephen Markley. Ohio is a fairly complicated novel about a group of alumnuses of a small town high school in Ohio who 10 years later are coming back into contact with one another. It's not completely about revenge, but there is revenge in this story, and it's a revenge that you root for, I think. Because of the awful things that have been done, it's a revenge you root for. It's a revenge, that you can support up until it actually happens, and then you realize that act of vengeance, that incredibly brutal act of vengeance, doesn't solve any problems, doesn't make the person who carries out that vengeance feel any better. And then the last novel I wanted to mention for revenge is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. In this novel, Tokarczuk has the novel told through the point of view of essentially an isolated woman living in a remote area of Poland where she doesn't have a lot of neighbors, and she begins to stumble upon murder victims out in the wilderness, and she comes to the conclusion that those men have been murdered by the very animals that they used to hunt and abuse, and that she believes the animals are taking vengeance, or she says she believes the animals are taking vengeance on these men, and a kind of mystery ensues and surrounds that idea. Anyway, there are my 10 books on the theme of revenge. If this is something you'd like to do, this kind of 10 books on a theme, you don't have to do revenge if you don't want to, but you can. I'd be interested in seeing your videos, interested in seeing your comments in the comments section down below, and as always, thank you for watching.